Flying FPV in winter is different to flying in the summer months. I wanted to put a little video together for those of you who may be quite new to FPV and who have recently taken it up and may be having their first FPV flights or thinking of having their first FPV flights in winter. There's a couple of things that you need to think about, mainly around equipment, which we'll look at about power considerations, and also extra little pieces of preparation. So this video will kind of take you through those things. A lot of this is common sense, but some of it is stuff that I've learned through hard knocks and experience. And I'll show you a little video at the end of one of my models crashing because I didn't follow all of this advice. So hopefully it's useful to you. And first of all, let's talk about equipment. The main things that we need to think about when it comes to equipment is the fact that it's going to be a lot colder and there's going to be a lot more moisture in the air. First things, of course, is the camera on the front of the model. If we're flying through any mist or fog, we will build up little bits of condensation on the lens. So, take a hard look at the sky, make sure it's nice and clear. If it isn't, try and keep the altitude down for two reasons, really. One, you will get that condensate on the lens, but secondly, you'll also get into trouble as you go into the low cloud and you'll start to lose orientation. And that really brings me on to the next couple of things. Telemetry. It's always useful to have telemetry on the model so you can see where it is, or at the very least have a return to home function set via a GPS adapter. So that means that if you get into trouble, you can just flick a switch and the model can come back to you if you're in trouble. Now the crash I'll show at the end, I could have saved myself that if that feature had been turned on that particular model. It now has GPS on that particular model, but it hadn't when I flew it. Spotters. Worthwhile always having a spotter with you when you're flying FPV, even if it's on private land. Having a pal with you who can keep eyes on the model is always important. And if you in your goggles start to lose orientation or position, then they have been watching it all the time and can talk to you about where it is and what's happening. Also, for situational awareness, it's good to have somebody around who can help with that. And I found that having a separate ground station with a separate screen on it, or vice versa with the goggles, means that both of you can keep an eye on the model. So the FPV station, let's talk a bit about that. Worthwhile having one set up as a separate thing. Flying with goggles in cold weather can be interesting, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And with the FPV station, it means that you don't have any of those problems, and it also means that multiple people can kind of watch what's going on and support the flight. And finally, let's talk about goggles. This was one of the problems that I had in particular. So these are my flat shark goggles. These are Predator V2s. Great basic all-rounders. And the challenge that you have is if you have driven to the field and these have been in your car, then they will be cold. And as soon as you put these cups around your eyes, the condensation and the moisture off your eyes themselves will actually start to settle out on the lenses and they will fog up. So, big tip, number one, always make sure that these have been inside your coat or in the car with you when you're driving to the field rather than in the boot where it's cold, so that condensation doesn't happen. So we'll show you what happens when you lose the ability to see where the model is in a bit. So that being said, let's talk about power. Our friend, the LiPo battery. Now, LiPo batteries, like all batteries, rely on a chemical reaction to happen to produce the electricity, and that is part of the problem. The reaction that's happening chemically within the packs to allow you to pull the voltage and amps out of the things slows down with temperature. So the warmer it is, the more efficient they are at doing it. The colder it is, just like the rest of us flesh and blood animals, the more sluggish they are to get going. So you will find that two things will happen in cold weather. The main one being that you will lose a little bit of capacity. So your flight times will be shorter. So make sure that you've allowed for that. If you have a model that would normally fly for 10 minutes, set the timer for 8. Or if you have one that normally flies for 8 minutes, set the timer for 6 and a bit. Give yourself a little bit of headroom. Don't stress the batteries and destroy a pack by pushing it too much, or be over a pond or something in the difference in FPV and then start to lose power and have the craft descend because it just can't pull the current. So be aware of that. The other thing you can do is keep your packs warm, as we talked about with the goggles. The goggles need to be kept nice and warm. I would suggest that you keep these packs in a warm place as well. Don't leave them in a box in the cold weather where the cold can get to them. And you can also buy things like battery warmers. I don't think you need to go that far, but keep it in mind, and make sure that these guys are warm. And a friend of mine told me that when they come off the model and they are warm because they've been run, they also make handy hand warmers for cold weather. Let's talk about prepare. So the last thing we'll talk about is preparation. So we've talked about the fact that you need to make sure that you're aware of any low haze or fog or low cloud, so that you can look into that. If you do accidentally go into it, just drop the throttle and come straight back out. The longer you're in there, the more condensation that your model will pick up, and the more chance that you'll have that it will go into somewhere that it won't like. Moisture as well is also a problem when landing. The grass and where you come down will be a lot wetter than it will be normally when you're flying in the summer, and it will kick a fine spray back into and under the model, as well as all over the electronics. So think about that. If you can come down on a concrete surface which is a little bit drier, then that's better than coming down in grass in cold weather. Plus, when you come down hard in a field or in grass, then you might find that not only is it moisture that gets kicked up, but little fine particles of mud and grit as well, and these will go straight into your motor bearings and cause you problems. And I've had that when I've had to strip a motor and actually flush a bearing and grease it to get the motor running okay again. Last couple of things then, wrap up warm. It seems really obvious, but if you're going to be stood out there all the time, you'll be amazed how quickly your fingers will lose the fine motor control that you'll need to control your model up in the air. So, regularly put your hands back into gloves if you're not flying. Take hand warmers, or as my friend jokes, just hold a couple of used lipo packs. They'll keep your hands nice and warm. Make sure you do have a spotter. Make sure that spotter's experienced and you've been with them before. It's always tough when you're a spotter. It feels quite a responsibility, particularly if it's a cold, fine day and the model's disappearing into the middle distance. You need someone who knows what they're doing, who'll stay calm. And finally, the other big tip, apart from make sure that your goggles don't steam up, is make sure that before you take off, you are clear about where the sun is in the sky, because the sun will be lower, and that low sun will also affect and blow out the cameras a lot faster. It's not above you. If you turn around, it will white out some of the views. And also be aware of where the shadows are falling, because if you are at one side of a field and you're over the other side and you lose orientation, if you know that the sun is behind you, then when you turn the model towards the sun and go forward, you'll know that you're actually returning to home. And that, if you don't have a GPS return to home feature, is a really important bit. So even if you get a bit lost, you'll know where home should be in relative to your position, and you can come back and then pick up the model visually in the sky and bring it in to land on that nice dry concrete surface. So hopefully that's helped those of you out there who are looking or have started flying FPV in winter. Be safe, be warm, and happy flying. So now what we'll do is actually see what happens when you don't follow some of this advice. So this was earlier in the season where I was flying just before the weather really turned. So it was a bright, clear, sunny day. It was the first flight. The goggles hadn't warmed up, and I was actually using a spotter that hadn't really done it before, and because of that the model was getting further and further away until it got so far away that the video link broke. Now at that point when I lost video, because I didn't have a GPS return to home function on the model, the only option that I had, I knew I was over a field somewhere, was to drop the throttle and bring the model down. But I'll stop talking now and I'll let you enjoy the full crash.